You're listening to Travel Tales with Fergal.
You know, you do these interviews in special places, but myself and my ex at the time, we went to elegy, but elegy is like an island off the coast of Rio State, not Rio City, but Rio State. And had an amazing 2 days there. And you walk through the rainforest to get to this like beach with humongous waves, like, swimming in these big waves. And it was such a cool spot. But myself and my ex went for a walk down the beach, and you eventually, it's a cove. So eventually you get to a part of the beach where the water is just completely calm. And the two of us were in the water there. Beautiful, like, just such a gorgeous jungle beach, nobody around. And I just remember thinking like, wow, this is one of the most amazing experiences of my life. Talking about a perfect moment. That was like one of those perfect moments of just being like, wow, this is as good as life gets, you know?
Just heard the voice there of my very special guest today, the brilliant Irish-American comedian Des Bishop, who shares with us today the 5 fascinating places that have most influenced him. I've run a comedy club in Clonmel for well over 15 years, so if you ask me what is the one thing I've yet to experience that I've missed the most since the first lockdown in 2020, then I'd have to tell you it has to be the joyous atmosphere of being in a packed room for a stand-up show. So I'm delighted that my first show since March 2020 will be Des Bishop in Clonmel on the 10th of March. It will actually be nearly exactly 2 years to the day since I was last at a sellout comedy show. And that was when I saw the comedy legends Martin Short and Steve Martin on March 11th, 2020 at the last show at the Three Arena in Dublin just before the first lockdown. It's been a long 2 years, and we surely are due some fun times as the world gets back to some form of normality. So now I'm going to go straight into the interview with Des, and I know you're going to enjoy this one. Des, you're very welcome to the podcast. Great to see you again. You're just about to start your nationwide tour, Me and Mama, and you're coming to Clonmel, I'm delighted to say, on the 10th of March. And I haven't actually been to a gig for 2 years, so I can't wait to see you.
Yeah, I can't wait. I've got a great memory of the room in Clonmel. I'm on a good run with that hotel room there.
It's always a sellout and it's always electric, and that's, you know, it's one of the things that I haven't done that I miss the most is live comedy, and that room is always electric, you know.
Yeah, that room really works. It's funny how you never know what is the dynamic of that room that works, but it does work. And of course, we have to give the people of Clonmel credit. Jeez, we can't make it sound like somehow the builders, you know, put some magic sauce in the walls. I mean, it is the people of Clonmel. I will say a little bonus about this the Mama tour, because I'm not actually starting the tour; I'm restarting the tour. So the bonus is that I'm still doing Me and Mama, which is a show that, yeah, it's quite a special show, you know, and a lot has gone into it, probably more than normal in terms of preparation and writing. But, you know, a lot has happened since Me and Mama shut down unexpectedly because of the pandemic. So I'm kind of doing another show in the first half. So essentially it's like 2 shows.
Excellent.
Now, I mean, maybe some people would prefer if I bring an opener, but in this situation where I have all my pandemic material and I got a lot to get off my chest. So it's really 2 shows. Sometimes I don't know if I should do Me and Mama in the first half because it's about death, and then bring people up, resurrect, no pun intended, the vibes, even though Me and Mama is a great show, but it is quite theatrical. I don't know if I should do that first and then come home with some pandemic ramblings. But we'll see.
Well, we can't wait to see you anyway. It's going to be special. I mean, people are going to be just, you know, to be able to get out, and that thing of being in an electric room, it's just, can't wait for that.
Yeah, we just have to get them, feel the fear and do it anyway. Book tickets. Don't worry. Exactly. You know, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine.
We'll all go down together.
Hey, Billy Joel. The problem is, you know, a lot of people don't get these references anymore.
Yeah, true. So where are you? You are in?
I'm in New York. Yeah, I was in New York a lot of the pandemic, and so I'm in New York now. Going back to Ireland. I was supposed to go back to Ireland. I was supposed to start January 6th. Then I was going to start mid-January, and one last delay, and then a week and a half later, Ireland was just like from total, from curfews, from communist era society control to no COVID certs, just like that. Snap the fingers, go, go, go.
It's classic Irish, isn't it? It's like,
listen, I think they were right. I think we were waiting for the stats on Omicron. It was good to be cautious, but then once it became clear that caution wasn't necessary, I say open her up.
Is this the longest, that period, so say from March 2020 or whatever, was that the longest period that you're out of Ireland? You were only probably in Ireland a short time.
100%. No competition. Actually, sorry. The only competition was my year in China. Yeah. I wasn't in Ireland. So that was the longest until March 18th, 2020 until August 2021. So yeah, a year and whatever that was. Yeah, a year and 6 months.
It's different when you can't go. Do you know what I mean? At least in China, if you wanted to go to Ireland, you could. But this time, did you find you were pining for the country?
I finally felt like an immigrant. I finally felt like an Irish immigrant. I was sitting at home writing Irish songs, being like, "Oh, I can't wait for an oat milk latte on Francis Street." It's obviously you're pining for different things these days.
Yeah, is that the potatoes?
Well, yeah, the potatoes the usual and Kerrygold, but you can get Kerrygold now.
True.
I get Kerrygold across the street. I have my fiance addicted to the Kerrygold. And
you got married, or sorry, not married, but you got engaged as well. Was that last March?
I know. Took the fucking pandemic. No, yeah, I got engaged last Valentine's Day. But
romantic.
Fucking pandemics after messing everything up, But the good news is that she came. I brought her to Ireland in December, so she likes it. So
that's crucial.
But I thought I was going to meet an Irish woman.
So did you get
a bit more Irish?
Did you get engaged before you brought her to Ireland? That was like a high risk one there. Imagine if she didn't like Ireland.
Well, I had time to call it off if she didn't like Ireland,
Exactly. So
I could use that as an excuse.
Yeah, true. So the idea of this is we do 5 locations, and yours, there's a possibility, depending on what the first one is here and now, there's a possibility that for the first time ever, I haven't been to any of the locations. So that's always, I like that.
The first one, you've been to the location because it's not that far. True. It's an Irish location.
Exactly.
But, by the way, I picked these based on your criteria was like a special place, right?
Yeah.
So I picked places these aren't like the best places I've ever been to, but I picked places that have some sort of
exactly
meaning or relevance. Was that correct?
That was perfect, because sometimes people go, yeah, the Canaries, I had a great holiday, and that doesn't work for me. As a podcast, it has to be special. So yeah, no, and also you picked ones that I was hoping you'd pick. So the first one, Connemara.
Oh yeah, well obviously that's obvious, right? Because I made a documentary series about that time, but obviously it was more than just a television show for me. I mean, I spent a year there. It's this incredible experience. For those perhaps you have listeners that aren't aware of it, I was making a TV show for RTE, which was to spend a year there and try to learn enough the Gaeilge to do stand-up in Gaeilge. And so I had no idea what it was going to be like. I had no idea if the people were going to accept me. And the people accepted me. The experience was great. The language learning was so much more interesting to me than I expected. And then there came the deeper stuff of feeling more connected to Ireland because through the language. Obviously you feel more connected to the people there through the language, but on a personal level, somebody who's always perceived as an outsider and, questions their connection to the place. The language did kind of anchor me deeper into Ireland. And to be honest, living by the coast for a full year through all the 4 seasons was quite special. And there was a lot of solitude.
Where was it? Where were you?
So I was in Lettermore, which is like, South Connemara, which is really the heart of the Gaeltacht there. It's sort of, I mean, officially it begins in Barna, but I think really, once you hit Spidal, you can start to feel like you're in an Irish language world. And I went to the Colosh Lurgan in Injavon, and I lived in Lessermore. I played the Gaelic football with Cumanpel Nivana, Lettermore, the Islands, Cantor Ilon, and I really was like in the community. I lived like an Irish language life, and I mean, there's so much that went on top of realizing that I'm good at learning languages, which would then inspire other things. But in terms of my Connemara experience, I ran the Connemara half marathon. Not the Connemara triathlon. I was swimming in the sea every day. I was pulling lobster pots with the people that I was living with, the Fatwillis. And I mean, it was a unique, special experience that one could never forget.
You mentioned there about feeling like an immigrant. So you're kind of unusual because you could say, an American immigrant to Ireland and an Irish immigrant to America. So, when you went there first, or do you feel that in Ireland that you're an outsider? You know what I mean?
Well, I did for a long time. The Irish, of course, love. I mean, a lot of it's in jest, like joking around about you're not Irish and all that stuff. But there is a resistance to accepting, say, like Irish America as part of Ireland, which I can understand to some degree, but some of it's silly because the diaspora. You can't ignore the Irish diaspora as part of the Irish experience, because not all countries, but some countries rely heavily on the diaspora, like Greece and Ireland and Israel, especially, like some are more complicated than others, but, some of them really make up who they are, and Ireland's influence on the politics of other countries, despite being this small island, has been essential. I mean, it was essential in Irish independence. It's been essential in the peace process in Northern Ireland. Like the Irish diaspora has been very important for Ireland. And so I feel like to a degree, they deserve a little bit more of a place at the table in terms of Irish identity. However, I was completely accepted. So I know a lot of this stuff is in jest. And I also can completely sympathize with how annoying it is when, somebody who's like a fifth generation Irish person in the United States comes to Ireland sort of feeling like they're Irish, but really having no concept of what being Irish is. But that, of course, is not our experience, because we grew up in a very genuinely Irish American childhood. My father wasn't American, number one, but all his friends were Irish. And, we played Gaelic football, and we tried to stay connected to Irish culture. So, we didn't come, as I didn't come as a total outside being to Ireland. And I certainly came with patriotism for Ireland. I came with like a deep love for Ireland in my soul. Some would say a problematic love for Ireland, perhaps almost a passion for Irish independence that belonged in 1917. But anyway, that's the other Irish American issue.
And was your mother born in America, or did she?
Yeah, my mother's an Irish American, born in New York, of Irish parents, and I talk a lot about that in Me and Mama, because she had that first generation experience, whereas my dad was actually born in the UK, raised in Middleton, County Cork, and then went back to the UK. So like he was a genuine immigrant, and he was more the one that couldn't let go of Ireland. He was the one that all his best friends were like Irish guys, and he was the one that talked about Gaelic football, whereas my mother's love for Gaelic football was, her memories were going to the Bronx and watching her father play Gaelic football. So her stuff was a little bit more Irish American, but both of them had very difficult childhoods. And in my mother's case, her difficult childhood was very much from the wreckage of Ireland, my grandma's life. I talk about this in Me and Mom, actually, but you know, the beginning of my grandmother's dysfunction very much came from the Irish side, and what she fled, which was not poverty, by the way, but she definitely fled the wreckage of the War of Independence, mental illness, alcoholism, and she brought some of that to the States. And unfortunately, she raised my mother, you know, amidst all that stuff. So my mother's like childhood, and I think a lot of my mother's like demons, Irish people really identify with. So when I tell the story of me and Mama, it does not seem foreign to people. I'd say they very quickly forget that my mother even had a New York accent, because her struggles are very Irish, and particularly like Irish mothers and Irish daughters, Irish sons too, but they identify with my mother, and then they identify with my relationship with my mother. So I think either it's particularly Irish or it's just particularly human, and we see it through the lens of being Irish, so we think it's an Irish experience.
Like I could relate to there what you were saying. You said she was the organizer, and I was kind of going, gosh, that's still, you know, I'm married with 4 kids, and you're saying like the father kind of could do what he wanted, and the mother was the organizer and the warrior, and I'm going, yeah, we haven't changed, have we? The world, you know.
Oh, I was. You probably heard me say that on Tommy Tiernan, I guess.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what I said on Tommy Tiernan, but yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, a lot of people can identify with all that stuff. But you know, in me and Mama, obviously, I have a little more time to get into it, and a lot of people can get that. But you know, it's tough. Like it's tough on the. Funnily enough, that was the joke that I forgot in the show. Which I don't even know if we were talking about that before we started recording or after, but you know, I just the other day I discovered a joke from me and Mama that I'd completely forgotten over the 2 years of the pandemic. And the joke very much was that it was tougher for my mother because, you know, in 1975, she had to give everything up because that's what you did. And there was no Me Too, and there was no sense of motherhood as a job. That's the big difference between now and then, was that there was no respect for motherhood as a job, as a career choice. Yeah. You know, it was like a duty that you had no choice over, and you didn't really get any respect for it. Yeah. And the joke I say in the show is, you know, she didn't have Instagram to, like, after I was born, go on Instagram and like do a breastfeeding picture on Instagram, and everyone's like, that's right, you're a mother, and get like 1,000 likes. And, you know, no, she was just like, that's your job. Stay at home, look after the kids. My father will go to work. And, you know, he really got the better end of the deal.
You know what, there's a hopeful message from it too, I would guess, because, you know, you talked about the idea of anxiety and worrying about, had she done a good job, and you're saying you wish you'd told her more. And I think that's a really good message, you know, that people will really relate to.
I think so. That seems to be the feedback. Now, I wasn't delighted after the interview. It was actually recorded in December. I don't know if I'm giving away RT's secrets, but that's the reason why I was back in December, actually. And after the interview, I would have preferred it to, I don't mind a bit of intensity in the interview, but I would have preferred maybe a release from the intensity. So for me, I was very unsure how that would be perceived. But, you know, the good news is that, you know, when you're that honest, you know, and like those were realizations I had. They weren't realizations that came from talking to Tommy. So I was very comfortable talking about that, you know, because that wasn't how I felt when I was doing Me and Mama in 2020, you know, just heading to a year since my mother died. I never made it to a year since my mother died. The pandemic happened. Yeah. So the show actually stopped 2 weeks before my mother's like 1 year anniversary of her death. So obviously when you have more time, you know, you get to these realizations of, yeah, you know, it's a pity that I didn't make it clearer. Although I have to say, you know, I don't know if it really would have made that much of a difference for her. I feel like her anxiety was so chronic that she probably would have hung her worries on something else. But, you know, it's just unfortunate for her that she got sick when she did, because she had been making a lot of progress. And obviously once you get into survival mode, you're not worried about what you were working on with the grief counselor, you know?
You know, like when you're on stage, say for that show and your father's show, my dad was nearly James Bond, like, was there ever a time when you were on stage and you know, it kind of hit you? Like, was there?
No, I mean, there are a couple of times. The biggest one with my dad's show was, you know, because my dad's show wasn't about my dad being dead. My dad's show was actually about my dad being alive, and he was with me for most of it.
True.
And so the one of the tougher but also more momentous nights was the first night back on stage after he died, because, you know, we had made a documentary and Tommy was joking in the show. It's like somebody dies, you make a show. But like I didn't just do a show. We made a fucking documentary, and I wrote a book about my dad. So I did a lot with my dad dying. But anyway, so it was very public when he died, because he died the Tuesday after the documentary had gone on the Thursday before. Wow. So it was kind of like fortuitous timing in terms of his death being momentous, which my father would have loved. And so I had to delay shows for like a week or a week and a half. So it was actually in Galway in the Town Hall Theatre was the first show back. And that was emotional, mainly just walking out, because the crowd gave it a little extra. They knew what was up. And I think they were grateful that I had been there, because actually the previous Galway show, the night before, I had to cancel. That was tough. And a couple of times with my mom's show. Actually, I just did one a few weeks ago here in New York, and my brother was at it. It's the first time he'd seen it. And that felt a little different, because like a family member was there. So, but in general, no. But I don't mind when it does hit you a little bit, because it feels pretty authentic. Yeah. It's not like I'm concerned about getting teared up in a show about my dead mother,
There was a famous one with Daniel Day-Lewis. I think he was doing Hamlet, and he saw the ghost, and one night he just walked off the stage, because he
saw his dad.
Yeah, exactly. And he just walked off, didn't come back.
Well, if I could summon just an ounce of the intensity of Daniel Day-Lewis, I'd be happy in my show.
Exactly. Mightn't work for comedy if you just walk off.
So I express grief in the show in actually quite a physical way. It's a bit of a performance piece. So I'm sort of protected by the spectacle that is my grief section of the show. So it doesn't require me to summon any deep method acting abilities to touch on my grief.
So your next one now, we'll move on to it's West Cork, the Beara Peninsula. And the place
it's Junction Beara particularly though.
Yeah. I wanted you to pronounce it, you see, not me.
Oh, right. Sorry.
What is it? What is it? How'd you pronounce it?
Well, they say Junction Beara, I guess, like kind of like a D and a Z together, Z together, Junction Beara. I think. Don't quote me on that. I think it's Tibetan, because it's a Buddhist retreat center / monastery in West Cork. Now, I am not a Buddhist, and there's some criticism out there of the powers that be that are involved in the Junction Beara in terms of from the Tibetan side. I don't ignore that or dismiss it, but I've never gone there to be part of the institutional part of the Junction Beara. And I shouldn't begin by suggesting anything negative about it, because I think it's one of the most amazing places. The only reason I say that is because I told a friend recently, and he's like, was like pointing that out, but that it's like the equivalent of like stopping yourself from feeling the wonder of a beautiful cathedral in Florence, and just thinking about everything problematic about the Catholic Church.
Exactly.
The two can exist simultaneously. So anyway, there's nothing comparable to that in terms of the Junction Beara. But anyway, the Junction Beara is an amazing Buddhist retreat center on on a kind of cliffside in between Castletownbere and Allihies. And if you've ever been down that far, the place is pretty rugged and it feels pretty remote anyway. The landscape is pretty spectacular. And right around the time that you get to the turnoff from the main road to go to the Junction Beara, you're in a bit of a moonscape, these kind of like Connemara has them too, these moonscape landscapes. And you drive up to what feels like, an extremely remote place, but then you see these beautiful whitewashed buildings and you think like, oh, this is cute. And then you walk to the edge of the road and you are looking out at the Atlantic in the most beautiful setting, like as majestic as the cliffs of Moher, honestly, like exceptional place, especially because it really hits you by surprise. And they have a meditation room that looks out over the Atlantic. And I've done a lot of meditation workshops there. And why it's so special to me is because when I stopped drinking in 1995, I went back to UCC and I was involved with, guys in recovery from Cork. And they were the ones that introduced me to Junction Beara, because one of them actually had been from Castletownbere. And, we used to go there a lot. I used to stay in the hostel. The hostel was cheap. And, we did one of the retreats and I did a lot of the meditation workshops. And I just learned a lot of skills about meditating, and actually about the simplicity of meditating, just essentially just being, turning off your mind. There's nothing to it. Because, I guess a lot of people think of meditation like as if there's some magic to it, but really there's nothing to it, literally nothing. And so I that's where I experienced that for the first time down there. And I went down there on my own sometimes and stayed in the hostel. And then over the years, I go to visit. And, the Buddhists are very big on death. And I brought my mother there after my father died. It's just a great place to just find peace, serenity, acceptance. And I took Hannah there just gone in September. Wow. Or in December. And we got very lucky with the weather. Like the sky opened up, beautiful sun. And there was a cat. Hannah's a cat person. And there's a cat that lives there now that loves to just get up on your shoulder. And like Hannah spent most of the day walking around, looking at this beautiful scenery and like meditating outside with a cat on her shoulder. It was amazing. So she now loves the Jagshanbera. I mean, it's a little fancier now than my early days. Like they have a great cafe. That's like a genuinely nice cafe. And you're sitting there drinking coffee, looking out over the sea. In my time of going there, they built a hospice. They have like a center for caring for the dying, and now they're building an actual Buddhist temple that's in construction.
Yeah, because I think I read about it, and the owner's wife died. So I think that's why he did the hospice, wasn't it? I could be wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's the whole thing. Is like I'm not involved with the institution of the place at all. I'm just like a praiser,
and anyone can go to
can't.
Anyone can go there.
Anybody can go. You could go there right now. You could finish this podcast, jump in your car, and drive to West Cork and have a coffee, before 5 o'clock. And it's like it's very open. It's very welcome to visit. And by the way, can I also say that my mother's mother, my grandmother, is from Glengarriff. She's from close to there. So literally, she's from the other side of the mountains from there. And it's so that's part of my connection to it. Is I always feel a special connection to West Cork, because my despite speaking ill of my grandmother earlier, I did not see that side of my grandmother. To me, my grandmother was the most loving individual I'd ever met in my life. And like most people have a very special relationship with their grandmothers, I had a very special relationship with my grandmother. We were very close. And so for me, being down there in general, the fact that place can exist in the place where my grandmother's from adds to the specialness of it.
Actually looking it up before I come on the call, and when I typed in Zongen, a guy came up, a YouTube clip that I just went into about Zongen meditation, certain type of meditation.
Oh, right.
And it was the first time ever that it made sense to me, because the guy was going,
oh, really? See, there you go.
Yeah, it was funny, because do you know what he was saying? He was like going, you'll be thinking about a million things, but don't worry about that. Just go away, and then the next time you come back, there'll be a little bit less and a little bit less, and just the fact that you keep coming back. And I went, yeah, okay, because anytime I think about it, I go, I'm thinking of stuff. How can I meditate? But made sense.
Yeah, and then also you criticize yourself for not being able to not think.
Exactly.
And that is the great thing about what they're saying. It's all the time they're basically letting you know that the thinking will happen, but they're big in the concept of a practice, and essentially, you have to train, like you have to do it regularly to get that emotional stability and mental calmness. It doesn't just happen. You don't just go from 3 years of being out of control with your thinking and you're emotionally unstable, then sit down, breathe in and out a couple of times, try not to think, and then suddenly like you have an empty head. That's not going to happen. One of the things that's in one of the books that they read is a story that's also in Kung Fu Panda. So I assume it's generally part of Eastern philosophy, but the master tells Kung Fu Panda that the mind is like a glass of muddy water. If you keep stirring it, it will remain cloudy, but if you let it sit, the mud will sink to the bottom and the water will become clear. And they always use that as the metaphor for the mind, that the trick to meditation is all you're doing is stopping stirring it. So of course, at the beginning, all these thoughts, the sediment is going to be spinning around. But if you let it settle, and letting it settle is not just one meditation session, you begin to bring in meditation as part of your life, and the sediment does settle. But I have to say, I was much more disciplined at the practice of meditation in the earlier days of my recovery when I first stopped drinking. And I was putting out the fires of my emotional instability, but life happens, you get busy. And, I haven't been as good, although in more recent times I have gotten back into it.
And was that part of your idea of going to China then? That mysticism and Eastern?
No, that was a combination of always wanting to learn Chinese, my connection with Leo and the guys from Abacadabra, and having gone there to visit them when they were on a vacation in 2004, and really being blown away by China and how different it was, and which ties in a little bit to another location I gave, but I won't jump ahead. But so China then was like, and then when In the Name of the Father did well, and I realized I'm pretty good at learning languages, I then pitched this concept of living in China to learn Chinese, to do stand-up in Chinese, because then it was 2008, the Beijing Olympics was coming up, coincidentally enough, just about to happen again, very controversial. But the world was very much opening up to the fact that China was on the rise by 2008, and there was a lot of China interest. So I felt that this language hook would be a great way to, make a series, to learn about China, and that there would be an interest. So all those things together brought up the China obsession. But, also the neighborhood that I grew up with in Queens, Flushing, had become very Chinese in my lifetime. So I had numerous occasions where I got to know my neighbors, but couldn't communicate great. So I had really started to develop a desire to learn Chinese, same way I had a desire to learn Irish. So I was exposed to the Irish language, but I didn't learn it, and I didn't have to learn it. So I never did, but I wanted. And so those two things were also similar. So again, like Connemara, having had the chance to live in China for a year and connect with that place, that was a special experience for different reasons than Connemara, but also just as like rewarding, especially because if you can feel like a slight connection to Chinese culture and the country of China, I mean, you're connecting yourself to a lot of people, and obviously I'm not looking for them to consider me Chinese. It's not the same as my Irish American story, but it is fun to be able to connect with Chinese people because there's so many, and it's a pretty rich culture and history, which I'm still like learning. From time to time, I'll go back into a China hole and I'll find myself looking up the history of Genghis Khan and how he affected China and then Europe. And then you just realize that, like, there's not actually that many degrees of separation between all world cultures.
Exactly. And where were you? Beijing, was it? Was that where you were?
Yeah, in Beijing. Yeah. Yeah, that was where I based myself. I wanted to be in a big city, but also a city that still felt quite Chinese. Shanghai. I mean, Shanghai, I actually had more connections in Shanghai in terms of like television and film and stuff. Shanghai potentially might have been easier for us. There was also a comedy scene already existing there, and they did help me. But I felt like Beijing would be better for language learning and be more like, would feel more authentic, feel more lost in China, which was correct. And so that worked, that worked out. But I traveled around a lot. I didn't just base myself in Beijing. I traveled through a lot of China, but I didn't leave China except for 2 weeks in August of 2013. I did go back and visit my mom, and then other than that, I was in China. I didn't come back to Ireland for the entire year, and I didn't travel to any other country during that first year.
And what's your impression then?
Oh God, it's too vast.
Well,
it's a whole other podcast.
But what's the first thing that comes to your head? Like if you go, someone says
people, a lot of fucking people.
You seem to get on very well with them, going on the show, the TV show.
Yeah, I got. They were great. I mean, Chinese, like, I love Chinese people and have a great sense of humor. But obviously, it's easier to connect with them once you have the language. So, yeah, I mean, and the other thing is, China is just like very different, and that's what's great. You really feel like you're in a different place. So, to be able to have connected with all that was great. It's very hard to say. Like, there's just so much. It's like so vast. The food was amazing. The cultures around the food was amazing. The importance of it, the way they socialize, very different. Not into like going out to bars. So like eating culture is like a big culture. So it was great to connect with that. great to get into their odd customs and, things that are okay to do, things that are not okay to do. The concept of face, this sense of showing respect, and they're a bit still more into the pecking order of age and, respecting elders and stuff. So there was just so much to absorb. And it was great.
And if someone was going to China for holiday and they asked you, like, would you say go to Beijing, or is there one spot that you recommend outside?
I mean, there's so many. If you're looking for the quintessential urban Chinese experience, then I think it's probably worth visiting like Beijing, Shanghai, and then some southern city, or like going to like Xiamen, the island in Fujian. If you're looking for like cities. But then if you're looking for like a more like Southeast Asian kind of like backpacking experience, like I think Yunnan province is great. You fly to Kunming and you can go and like see these like minority people, Shaoshu Mingzu, they call them, but they're not Han. Han is the majority. Like when you think of Chinese person, you're really thinking of a Han Chinese person, but there are other ethnic groups there. And some are more different than others. Like obviously the Xinjiang people, they're not even really Chinese. I mean, that would get me imprisoned. But Xinjiang people they're Turkish. They're Turkish. They have more in common with like Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. But they're so they're Muslim. So they're the most different, I would say, in terms of like the minority people, and obviously Tibetan people, because they don't I think most people are aware of that. But in Kunming, there's also like a lot of minority people, and they still have a lot of their cultures and stuff. So all that stuff is really fun. The weather's a bit more like Southeast Asian weather. And there are other spots like that, like Guilin, I went to one time. And, there are other spots where you can get into that more rural kind of backpacking experience, which is also fun. But Harbin, if there was another great Chinese city to visit, northeastern China, Harbin, where a lot of the Chinese people that emigrated to Ireland, they all come from the northeast, from Heilongjiang and Liaoning province, Jilin province. But Harbin is in Heilongjiang. It's a very cold city, but that's a cool city. Very influenced by Russian colonialism, and it's a great mixture of a sense of Russian architecture with Chinese culture, and it's a pretty fascinating city.
You were kind of thinking of staying on, weren't you, after the show? Like you seemed to.
No, I stayed on.
Oh, did you?
I stayed on for an extra year.
Wow.
Yeah. I was very involved in Chinese comedy. I was doing gigs in Chinese, so it wasn't going to be easy to do that outside of China. So I stayed another year. But that second year, though, I did the Melbourne Festival. I did the Edinburgh Festival. I did shows in Ireland. I was back touring in Ireland. I just happened to be living in Beijing,
So your next one is another spot I haven't been to. It's definitely on my bucket list, is Rio.
Yeah, Rio and Brazil. So that trip, the reason why I put that trip down was because really that was the first time I was in a place where I felt like I was really somewhere else. I had traveled on my own at that stage of my life, I traveled on my own to Italy, and I'd been to places in Europe and stuff, and that felt cool. But, it still felt European, like not entirely unfamiliar. Whereas when I was in Rio, I felt like I was really in another place, an other world. But the reason why I went to Rio was because it was after I completed radiation from, my treatment of testicular cancer. So it was a celebration of that, which was also like a special thing. And I was traveling with my ex of the time, and we were good travelers together, I have to say. We didn't make it as a relationship, but we were great on vacation. We killed it. And we really explored, like we only had 2.5 weeks. So I wasn't able to really like get lost in Brazil, but within that 2.5 weeks, whenever I meet Brazilians and I tell them what I did in that 2.5 weeks, they're quite surprised. We covered a lot of ground. But yeah, that was really when I got like the travel bug of like going to, unique places. And the people were so friendly, and, felt like a different culture, different food, different, there was just so much about it. And then we had this like special night where I guess we got a little bit off track in terms of, we went to Minas Gerais, we went to Belo Horizonte, which is that's like the main city in the Minas Gerais and the region. And we were on our way to this beautiful town for Easter, Ouro Preto, which is just like gorgeous UNESCO protected town. but we had this one night in Belo Horizonte, which is like it's like a nothing city, it's like getting stuck in, I don't want to give an Irish comparison, but in a way it'd be like if you were in the UK traveling, you got stuck in Birmingham, you'd be like, what are we doing in Birmingham? And there's like a lot of buildings from the 60s. And so we just end up like, there's like people drinking outside of like a shop, like it wasn't even like a fancy bar. And we like sat down to have a drink. And this like kid, I guess 21, 22-year-old kid, was like dying to practice his English. And he was like, like saying things like Bill Clinton, like he's just like doing like, and so next thing we just start hanging out with these Brazilians. We couldn't really communicate. And then they took us to this like rundown, like we could have got killed, but went to this like rundown, like dancing club. And we're just like hanging out with these Brazilians. And, I was naive then. So like, it just felt so cool. And so, like, wow, we're connecting with people in another world. And, it felt exciting and exotic. And that was when I got the beginning of a bug of like, it would be great to just get to know more cultures. And then, I always, you do these interviews, special places, but myself and my ex at the time, we went to elegy, which, sadly, like 5 or 6 years later, an Irish girl was murdered there. It was very sad. It was total, just like very sad story that sometimes if I mention it, people bring that up about elegy. But elegy is like an island off the coast of Rio State, not Rio City, but Rio State. And I had an amazing 2 days there. And you walk through the rainforest to get to this like beach with humongous waves, like swimming in these big waves. And it was such a cool spot. But myself and my ex went for a walk down the beach, and you eventually, it's a cove. So eventually you get to a part of the beach where the water is just completely calm. And the two of us were in the water there. Beautiful, like just such a gorgeous jungle beach, nobody around. And I just remember thinking like, wow, this is one of the most amazing experiences of my life. If you watch Spalding Gray, Spalding Gray, sadly he's dead now, but he talks about the perfect moment. I think it was in Swimming to Cambodia. He used to do these one-man shows, but talking about a perfect moment. That was like one of those perfect moments of just being like, wow, this is as good as life gets, So I that was always like a special spot. That beach, which I can't name, in elegy, which you can't get to unless you have a boat or you walk through the rainforest. And so that was like one of those special moments. I feel like those are getting harder and harder to achieve though, because the internet has made everything more accessible, which is a positive, but nothing feels as remote as it once did,
And you can look it up now and before, see photos.
Yeah, because we were walking around our lonely planet like a feckin' Bible. And, I don't know. There was just, it did seem more exciting. And I don't know, is it because I've gotten older or because everything's more accessible, but nothing's as exciting or as remote as it used to feel,
But you kind of described the two moments actually perfectly that are always special. One is when you go to a spot like that, like I always say, Clonmel is a bit like that. When I see tourists at Clonmel, I go, how did you end up here? But if you do end up in Clonmel, when you go to the bar, you're guaranteed people will talk to you because they'll be curious. Do you know what I mean? Somewhere that's off the beaten track. And then that other one, like when I was traveling, it's always it's like a sunset somewhere, and it's when you're on your own, and they're the most magical moments. So you can still do those no matter where. Because another thing I always say is like, even though you want to go off the beaten track, it's great going to touristy places because there's stuff happening on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You know what I mean? That they have like
totally.
Restaurants.
Well, because I always tell people not to go to Temple Bar, but the reality is that like, on a Monday night, if you're visiting, you should go to Temple Bar. And the thing is that touristy areas are interesting to tourists. That's why they're why they're there, and it feels inauthentic, but actually, it takes time to even be able to appreciate authentic stuff sometimes, so if you completely avoid touristy areas, you're probably avoiding things because they become touristy for a reason. It's not just commercialism, a lot of times there's like certain aspects of that area that attract tourists because they are quite unique. We take for granted, you walk around Temple Bar, you're like, wow, what a shithole. But actually, it's a pretty cool looking area. If you've never been to Dublin before, and suddenly you walk into this area and you feel like you've gone a little bit back in time. And, so it's understandable that people would want to go there. And obviously, you go to China, you go to Tiananmen, or you go to these like hutongs. And after a while you live in Beijing, you're like, you got to avoid those places. It's disgusting. But if you've never experienced it, it is pretty cool to see it for the first time.
And you would have traveled an awful lot, up to the last 2 years. Did you miss that? Like you'd be going to Australia, to Edinburgh. You had a route nearly every year.
Yeah. No, I really did miss that a lot. And especially in Australia, I would always take off and go to other spots. I was always like, the other comics would make fun of me because I kind of like I was always trying to get away from Melbourne and go to different spots, and like as if like the comedy was just like an excuse to be there. But so yeah, I did miss that. I mean, I've done a fair whack of traveling now. It's been not as restricted here. So I've been to Mexico twice during the pandemic, and that was really cool. Even though I haven't gone like Mexico. I nearly went to Mexico City last week. I kind of fucked up. I delayed my Irish tour, and then I forgot to put in my avails for the Comedy Cellar. And so I ended up having a week off that I didn't want. But I ended up going to Aruba because I know a guy down there in Aruba. So that's very like a holiday place. But I nearly went to Mexico City, which honestly I kind of regretted not going. But I did have a nice trip to Aruba. So I have done a bit of traveling. But the good news is Hannah's a little younger than me, and the real positive about that is there's still so much stuff that she hasn't done and wants to do. So I'm happy to go along for the ride with that sort of, her wide-eyedness. Plus, she was a tennis player, like at a very high level in her youth up until she finished college. And so she kind of missed a lot of the years of your early 20s where you would, be free. She was like trapped with the sport. So she still has a lot. And then, she immediately got into career and started like worrying about a career. So she has a lot of just like living to do. So I'm happy to help her, liberate her from her ambition and just go and travel.
Keep you young. And she's a high profile comedian. So how does that compare to Ireland? Like, is it a different level, like media profile and things like that in America? Or do you notice that?
Well, she's a bit, she's got a modern media profile in that some of her fame is from a reality TV show, but then she's also done well with the online stuff.
So your next one, during the lockdown, I follow you obviously on Instagram, and I used to get very jealous because you used to do a lot of stories. I presume this is where that beach is. Used to be
West Hampton Beach. Yeah, that's literally like, an hour and 50 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. It's not exotic, but you talk about special places, and that was the first summer of 1990. Actually, I was 14 years old, and my parents bought this rundown shack in an area that was threatened very badly by beach erosion. So they're dead now, so I can say it. They bought this little shack for $85,000. Which, at that time, especially should point out was only about 45,000 Irish pounds. It was nearly $2 to $1 to the Irish pound back in those days. So 45 Irish pounds, they bought this little beach shack at sort of the western edge of the Hamptons. Some people don't even consider West Hampton to be the Hamptons, but we're literally at the very western edge of West Hampton Beach. Literally, I walked the dog into the next town, the town of Brookhaven, but it's separated from the mainland by it's separated to the mainland because it is a barrier island, but it's also separated to the other side, the town of Brookhaven, by an inlet. So the town of Brookhaven starts, but then it's just a little stranded part of the town of Brookhaven because there was an inlet created by a hurricane in the 1930s. So anyway, needless to say, the story of my area is all a story of beach erosion. But beach erosion allowed us financially to get a foot in the door of the Hamptons, and over the years they reclaimed the beach, and the area has actually developed into quite a fancy little spot. Mm-hmm. But we still live in the structure of the original bungalow. We went up on stilts and we put on an extension, but I still live in the original house that we bought. And so the reason why I left so abruptly from the pandemic in Ireland, March 18th, was because the world was shutting down, and I had no desire to leave Ireland on March 18th, but I was worried about being stuck in Ireland for the summer. And because we have the house, and it's my house now, myself, my brother Aidan's house, I just wanted to spend the summer there. I've started to spend more time there in the summer, and but that's not why it's special. That's just why I chose to do the pandemic there. But it's special because from the age of 14, which was, by the way, the summer that I went to Ireland. So right before I went to Ireland, I had this beautiful first summer in West Hampton, which was great because I had a very difficult year, flunked out of school. And I connected with all these old people who were in their 30s. They were like all married couples with no kids at that time. And they kind of embraced me, 14-year-old little wise ass kid. They taught me how to play volleyball. They sort of took me, they accepted me as part of the beach crew. And people can identify, you get this like multi-generational beach crew summer vibe if you go to like Ackle or, Kerry or whatever. So, we became part of this like very small, close-knit summer community. And those people became very important to me over the years, playing volleyball and, just like, life, talking to me adults, talking to a young person about life. And it was like, they became good influences on my life. And those summers became so special. And like all those people that come to my wedding, like they're all still there. The majority of them are all still there. I've spent the majority of the pandemic with them. And, just the ocean, obviously, a lot of my places have to do with the ocean. The ocean is very important to me. I'm like an ocean guy. So to be able to go to the ocean all the time and to be there, and, it was a special place for my dad, sitting there on the beach. So there's just a lot about that place that's very important to me. So I'm very lucky to have that little retreat. It was essential during the pandemic. So lucky us.
I know. And the way like you picked there, I always think of you like as a New Yorker. So you didn't pick Queens. Like, do you consider yourself a New Yorker?
Yeah, I'm a New Yorker, but like that's where I'm from. You talk about places. I would never pick Queens. Queens is just where I grew up, and it was fine, but I would never pick Queens. Nah. But I do consider myself a New Yorker, but like I don't.
The only way you consider yourself a New Yorker, something I was wondering, because I watched clips of you on, say, the comedy club or whatever. What do they call it? Comedy Store. And do they consider you, people who listen to you, do they think you're Irish, or do they consider you a New Yorker?
Well, it's a very interesting thing, because in general, before the pandemic, I would always establish my unique identity. And people would definitely see me as a hybrid. And I think the average American comic and even audience member probably perceived me as more Irish than American, because despite my New York accent, which they can definitely hear the New York in my accent, which is a dying accent. People are trying to erase all, anything remotely local. They're trying to erase from their accents. There's a whole other topic, but I have a real New York accent. It's kind of like a dying accent, and I always try to explain to Irish brother, my New York accent is the equivalent of like a Dublin accent, like this is a working class accent to Americans, right? Which Irish people can't identify with, right? Like they don't hear working class in my accent, but Americans hear working class in my accent, which actually took me time to get my head around, because I've never spent so much time professionally in America that I started to realize that like people are making sweeping assumptions about me based on my accent, because my Irish experience has been very different to my New York experience. Like I definitely lived like a more like middle class / like intelligentsia life in Ireland. So it's funny how I could tell people make sweeping assumptions about me based on my accent. So anyway, but on stage, despite my accent, I really feel like people identified me more as like a Irish European sentiments. And even in my comedy styles, they would sort of feel a difference, which was good. Yeah. But weirdly enough, in the pandemic, we started actually April 2021, so we got back on stage a lot earlier here, and I had so much to talk about COVID. I just got to say, I just talk about COVID, my experience, and I never really established that I had any connection to Ireland, and I have to say it was quite liberating in that I found that there were times where it was of benefit for me, for them to just think of me as like a New York guy, an American guy, which I'd never thought of before. And also I think for me also it was liberating in that like I felt like I had more authority to talk about these American things, whereas before I felt like a bit of an imposter if I talked about these things. So it was nice to actually just like indulge in that. Now I've gone back to establish, I've gone back to sort of more hybrid identity, but I have to say, I enjoyed the freedom of just being like some New York guy on stage.
I loved during the Trump time, you were very vocal, and it was always interesting getting your angle in America. And now I'm really confused, because I always loved American politics, and I see Biden doing stuff, but all I keep hearing in Ireland and in America is people saying, he's doing nothing and he's useless. And I'm going, what's the perception with general public?
Well, he's not great. I mean,
Is he not?
I don't think he's great, but I'm just glad he's not Trump. So,
Yeah.
because I think he really has inherited a bad hand in that. But in saying that, Trump got dealt a bad hand with COVID, and all he had to have done was take it seriously, and he'd still be the president, right?
True.
So if Trump had actually just been like, let's get through this together, Trump would still be the president. I mean, he stupidly picked this divisive take on COVID and divided America, and unfortunately came out the wrong. Well, for him, I mean, he came out the wrong side of the divide, because essentially suburban women were like, you're an asshole, because they actually were worried about COVID. So, now he's gone, thank God. But I do think that, if we had Trump now for what's going on now, it would be even worse. But, Biden has had a bad hand. Afghanistan was a disaster. COVID came back. He appears to not have dealt with it great, because it became about testing and not about vaccines. Mm-hmm. Short-lived, though. Omicron, short-lived. But anyway, either way, he just hasn't looked great. He's made a lot of mistakes. He made another one recently with the Russia, making if it's an incursion, small incursion, maybe no big deal. And he's just not that articulate these days, right? So I don't think that he's in serious mental decline like these right-wing sites say, but he doesn't do himself any favors. He just hasn't been impressive. That's what I would say. He hasn't been impressive, and he's been very unlucky because the whole world's dealing with inflation, but of course in America, they're blaming it on Biden. It's all just the repercussions of a year and a half, like essentially nearly 2 years of a full pandemic. Biden's inherited all those things, and a lot of it he has to take on the chin. He just hasn't done himself any favors to try to get ahead of it or really sort of seem like a strong leader. And I don't think he has it in him to seem like a strong leader. Like I do think, a combination of his age, his natural temperament, and his speech impediment, actually, like all these things are sort of working against him to fit a narrative that his critics are spinning. And he's kind of giving them too much to just keep sliding in. Of course, the narrative is bullshit. He's just a typical politician that's kind of like rolling with the things that are thrown at him. But I would say generally I've been disappointed. And he's also been unlucky because Joe Manchin and whatever, Kirsten Sinema have just like, messed up every bit of, and I'm hoping that they don't mess up this new Supreme Court pick on top of it. So, America's very divided, unfortunately, and he hasn't been a great sort of leader for rallying one side, and, whatever. All that is very depressing. And it bears not thinking about. The only hope is that if we don't end up in World War III because of Russia, when the world reorganizes itself after COVID, that things will settle down a bit, because right now with the there's just so much post-COVID stuff that's just bad, that's hard to navigate. I feel that I don't know if Trump's going to come back, because I don't know if the establishment really want Trump back, and I think when push comes to shove, there may be enough energy of people that just don't want to go back to that madness that Trump won't come back. If he does come back, that'll be the end of America, though, because he will embolden these lunatics on the hard right so much that, you literally could have like a Handmaid's Tale situation, but, don't quote me on that.
When you're looking at a room then, like, are you sussing the room, or do you just do what you do? You know what I mean? So, we said America's divided. It's 50-50. An audience, maybe a New York audience might not be, but there's still going to be a certain different sides, both of the audience.
I don't get into it. I don't get into it. And there's a vaccine mandate, so it actually gets rid of most of them. So I haven't had to deal with that much, to be honest.
Good point. So thanks a million. Forgive me so much time. There's one last question. Maybe you've already answered it, but I'll ask it anyway, because I ask everyone. To close your eyes and take 4 deep breaths. Where is your happy place and why?
Do I have to actually do that now?
Yeah.
Oh, you have to take 4 deep breaths?
Well, no, not really. But, you can just close your eyes.
My happy place? Honestly,
yeah.
I probably go back to either that place in Brazil, or to sitting on the beach in West Hampton, or the meditation room in the Junction Bear. Those are places I always think about when I'm trying to go to my like calm, happy place. But I'm always on my own, which is interesting, but we'll get into that in another session.
Yeah. Well, that's what actually, as an aside, I always joke, like I traveled for a couple of years with my wife, and it was always like my happy place was always like sunsets But it was always like, I go, you know, I'm just heading out for a little walk, and I'd always come back going, that was the best sunset I've ever seen.
I have similar, especially in the mornings, because Hannah sleeps in, you know. So it's always I have these amazing experiences in the morning, and then I wait for fucking Hannah to get up.
So thanks a million, and I really look forward to seeing you in March. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, man. Thanks. Nice chatting to you. I'll see you then.
I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Des is touring all over Ireland over the next few months, including Clonmel on the 10th of March, and you can find all ticket details on desbishop.net. I would ask if you could please subscribe to Apple Podcast so a new episode will appear in your library every week. I would also really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review, as it helps others to discover this podcast. To find out who's on every Tuesday, please follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Travel Tales with Fergal. Stay safe and keep dreaming of future travels.
Travel Tales with Fergal.